So now we'll discuss variables and specifically types of studies that we can actually perform. So first things first, let's talk about the types of studies. So the first one is an observational study, and this means that it measures the specific characteristics without attempting to modify the subjects being studied. So basically, it's just saying, hey, you're saying that you're doing something, let me see. What are you doing? Or you say you watch so much television, cool, how much? Let me know. So you're not actually modifying anything. The experimenter is not modifying anything with the subject. A designed experiment, however, is the exact opposite. Specifically, it applies a treatment and observes the effect of said treatment. So hopefully you can see the differences between these two, right? So design experiment specifically gives a treatment, and the whole point is to see how the subject, or what the effects of that treatment is on the subject, as opposed to an observational study where you were just not specifically modifying the subjects, right? You're just seeing what they're already doing. All right, let's do a couple of problems. So problem number one in your word problems, let's determine whether this is an observational study or designed experiment. So the Pew Research Center surveyed 2,252 adults and found that 59% of them go online wirelessly. So this is an observational study or designed experiment. Hopefully you saw pretty easily this is just an observational study, right? There's no treatment. No one's given anybody anything. So this is just an observational study. And for shorthand, I'm just going to put OS for observational study. All right. When studying the Salk vaccine, over 200,000 children were given the Salk vaccine, while another over 200,000 children were given a placebo. So what would this be? An observational study or design experiment? Well, if you said design experiment, my question is going to be, what's the treatment then? Right? Because every design experiment has to have a treatment. And easily you can see that it's the Salk vaccine and a placebo, right? Some people were given a Salk vaccine, some people were given a placebo. So yes, this absolutely is a designed experiment, or DE for short. All right. The Milgram Research Company wants to study reactions to stress. So it administers surveys in which the person asking the questions pretends to become very angry with the survey subject. At one point, the surveyor screams at the subject and asks how anybody could have such stupid opinions. So is this a observational study or a designed experiment? Remember, if it's a designed experiment, it has to have a treatment. So if you're thinking maybe it's a designed experiment, what treatment would it be? If it's an observational study, then you have to ask yourself, is it true that the people are not modifying the subjects? Okay, so hopefully you can see where this is a little trickier. So the other two, probably pretty straightforward. This one is pretty tricky. So this actually is a designed experiment. Now the reason why. So they are asking people questions, right? They are surveying, but are the questions themselves the ones that they are actually like counting, that they're looking at? Are they actually caring what the answers to the questions are? No, right? They actually said that they're trying to find reactions to stress. So they don't specifically care about the actual questions being how the questions are being answered, right? They're really trying to see in what way do they answer them, right? Do they get really frustrated? Do they get really timid? Their reaction is the one that they're trying to find. So that actually, right, if you look at that definition of a design experiment, you apply a treatment and then see what the effect is to the person, right? So if you ask yourself, what's the treatment then? Well, it would be stress, right? They're applying stress to the patient or to the subject, and they're trying to see what happens, right? They're trying to see the effect of that. So just because we say treatment, a lot of times we think of like needles going into people, right? Or medicine being taken. However, treatment does not have to be physical. It can also be psychological. So yeah, that's why that one's a little trickier. Just because it's a treatment doesn't mean you actually have to touch the person. Like I said, a treatment can be a psychological treatment, which in this case would be stress. All right. So like I said, that was a little trickier. Hopefully it made sense by the end of it. Next, in a clinical trial, the cholesterol drug Lipitor, 188 subjects were given 20 milligram doses of the drug, and 3.7% of them experienced nausea. So is this a designed experiment or is this an observational study? Hopefully you can see pretty easily this is a designed experiment, right? And if it is, we need a treatment. So what's the treatment? It would just be the Lipitor drug, right? Easy peasy. And again, if you say this is a designed experiment, but you cannot tell me what the treatment is, then you may be wrong, right? Because every designed experiment has a treatment. So if you can't tell me what the treatment is, it may actually be an observational study. Next, in a study sponsored by Coca-Cola, 12.5 thousand people were asked what contributes most to their happiness, and 77% said it was their family or partner. So is this a designed experiment or an observational study? So hopefully pretty easily you can see that this is an observational study, right? Nobody's giving anybody anything. They're just asking, hey, what makes you happy? And these are the results. So there's no modification here. All right, so I'll let you in on a little secret. This is the other crazy one. It's another one that's a little harder. So 9-year-old Emily Rosa was an author of an article in the Journal of American Medical Association after she tested professional touch therapists. So this is a real event. You can actually Google this. She was 9 years old and she had a project in her elementary school and she got published in a medical journal. It was actually all over the news in like the 80s or 90s. Yeah, you can actually YouTube this. So using a cardboard partition, she held her hand out above one of the touch therapists, and the touch therapist was asked to identify the hand that she chose. So basically what would happen is that there was a cardboard partition, and she would let the so yeah, basically it was a cardboard partition. So this is from the perspective of Emily Rosa. So the touch therapist would have their hands, well, you know, if I could draw, but I can't, so. They would have their hands out here, and Emily Rosa would choose whether she was going to put her hand over the right hand or the left hand. And they were supposed to feel the energy and determine which hand Emily's was over. So, this is what's happening. Is this an observational study or a designed experiment? Now again, if it's a designed experiment, you got to tell me what's the treatment. If you say it's an observational study, you have to make sure that there's no modification to the subject. All right. So, like I said, this is another tricky one. So this is actually an observational study. So there is no treatment that's being applied, right? Her hand is not a treatment. Basically what's happening is that the touch therapists say, hey, guess what? I can actually feel energy between people. And Emily Rosa says, cool, let me see. So she is ultimately just observing what the touch therapist says they can do. Ultimately, the touch therapist is the one in control. They're the ones that are saying they can do this. And so Emily's just saying, hey, can I see? That'd be great. So again, just like in that other hard case, right? Just because it's a designed experiment does not mean that it has to physically be touching the person, right? You can have psychological stress or psychological treatment. And just like with the observational study, it does not mean that you can't interact with the person, right? But ultimately, in this case, there is no treatment being applied. Like I said, those are the two kind of harder ones. Hopefully, all the other ones were simpler and made a little bit more sense. But as always, if this still doesn't make any sense to you, please email me, text me, let me know. I can help try to explain it even more. And go ahead at me if you want. Go ahead and YouTube this. It's really interesting. I typically show this in my class. Just show them little clips of it, but it's really interesting. All right. So, talked about the studies. Now let's talk about the variables in the studies. So, the first one, a response variable. So, the response variable is the variable of interest that is measured in the study. This is also known as the dependent variable. Right? So, if you know x and y, right, this is the y variable. So, this is something that is happening in the world. Typically, the response variable you're trying to see the why is this happening question. So it could be increased weight in the nation. It could be whether a drug works, right? The effects of a drug. I guess it'd be effects of a drug. It could be increased blood pressure. Any of those things, right? So the reason why we are doing the study is because of the response variable. We're trying to figure out why is the response variable happening. A lot of times, that's what we're trying to figure out. That's what we're measuring. The explanatory variable is the variable whose effect on the response variable is of interest. So it should essentially, the explanatory variable should explain why the response variable exists, right? So this is known as the independent variable. Or if we know the x and y's, this would be the x variable, right? So let's look at just increased weight, right? So if increased weight is the response variable, what could be an explanatory variable? There's actually a lot of them. So it could be an increase in fast food consumption. It could be genetics, right? It could be a decrease in physical activity. There's lots of reasons why a group of people could have an increased weight over a period of years, right? And so one of them, we could just do an experiment over one of them and see, does this effect cause the response variable? All right, two more. So the other two that we got is the lurking variable and the confounding variable. So the confounding variable is an explanatory variable, so it's something that explains, right, the response variable that is considered in the study whose effects cannot be distinguished from the second explanatory variable, as opposed to the lurking variable, where this is an explanatory variable that is just not accounted for in a study that may relate to a certain explanatory variable. So both of these are called confoundings. The confounding variable is one that cannot be separated. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to kind of think of one, but it would be, for instance, if there is like, doing a biological experiment and the mitochondria in one case and the cell wall or cell membrane. So obviously I am not a biologist, so these probably have I'm pretty sure these have very different things in common. But let's just say for some reason at one point, both of these are doing the exact same thing for something. And you do an experiment and it says, yes, that is what's happening. But you have no idea if it's the mitochondria or if it's the cell membrane doing it, right? This would be a confounding variable. You can't distinguish one from the other in that case. The other one is just you're not thinking about it at all. So if you had, let's see, if you had like a study of rats, well, let's do something else. A study of trees, and they were just all over the place, right? So you looked at all the trees on campus and trying to see, is there a tree that has more sap than others? But you're looking at trees all over the place. So they are different types of trees. They're in different locations. They might be different heights or ages, right? And you're not accounting for any of this stuff. You're just looking at trees, and then you're saying, where's their sap, right? Who has the most sap in these trees? So because you're not taking into account any of these would all be lurking variables, right? These are ones that are not accounted for. And that's why I try to have control variables. That's why I try to eliminate as much variation as we can between different subjects to account for all of that. All right, so in the next video, we're going to actually give some examples, and hopefully we're going to try to figure out what are some confounding variables and lurking variables in the examples given. So please click the next video, and we can actually get some of these examples going.